Hello everyone, my name is Mailuu-Suu and today I'm presenting on the Mailuu-Suu Kyrgyzstan radiation crisis. So the objectives for our presentation is to understand the context of radiation in Kyrgyzstan and the causes of the Mailuu-Suu contamination. We'll go into what events led to locals needing to use the contaminated Mailuu-Suu water and land, and what the health consequences for those exposed to the waste from the Mailuu-Suu tailing sites are. Lastly, we will learn about the aftermath and how stakeholders need to help mitigate the issue right now and in the future. For a table of contents, we will go into the context of radiation in Kyrgyzstan, timeline of radioactive waste in Mailuu-Suu, Mailuu-Suu location graphs, Mailuu-Suu radiation statistics, and exposure risks and health effects of the tailing sites. When we look at the number of tailing sites in Central Asia, out of the 50 sites, 34 are in Kyrgyzstan. And related to the waste dumps of rocks and low-grade ores in Central Asia, 55% are in Kyrgyzstan. The government of Kyrgyzstan is not able to handle this issue alone and needs the help of other stakeholders. Because when we look at the history of this issue, it is not caused by this country. Thousands of tons of radioactive waste accumulated in the town of Mailuu-Suu since the Soviet era. From 1946 to 1968, the Zabadini Mining and Chemical Combine in Mailuu-Suu mined and processed more than 10,000 tons of uranium ore for the Soviet nuclear program. While uranium mining and processing is no longer taking place, the local population is left with contaminated lands and waters. The majority of the tailing dumps are located along the Mailuu-Suu River, and after a closure of the production sites in 1966 to 67, there was no remediation efforts, which leads to the issues today. When we look at the radioactive waste in the Fergana Valley, we can see that Mailuu-Suu area at risk of contamination bleeds into the Mailuu-Suu River, which affects not just Kyrgyzstan but also Uzbekistan as the water flows there. And when we look at a land map of the Mailuu-Suu area, we can see that the tailing sites are located above the water source and the town, which makes the area prone to landslides, and which means that the tailing sites with uranium and radioactive waste will bleed into the water and the villages when there are landslides and earthquakes. When we look at the sites of uranium industry in Mailuu-Suu, we can see that there are 23 mines which are closed. However, remediation efforts have not occurred yet but are planned. 13 waste pile rock sites which are partially remediated and cultivated. Remediation efforts are realized there, and 23 mill tailings are partially remediated and recultivated. However, more work needs to be done. And the issues for this area is prolonged rainfall and a series of earthquakes in the Mailuu-Suu region in the past and presently have renewed fears of waste radionuclides escaping from the nuclear waste pits in the tailing sites. And the number of landslides in the area is actually increasing, which is a grave concern. From 1950 to 2000s, you can see that the total area of failed slopes per year in the Mailuu-Suu Valley has been increasing. And this is a severe issue because more of the radioactive waste, will go into the local villages. And the local villagers may need to use the water source of the Mailuu-Suu River despite its contamination because it's animal crops and crops needed for irrigation purposes, not only for their villagers' drinking purposes. And a lot of villagers may not have the money to buy uncontaminated water sources from outside of this region, and even when they have the money, drought in other regions may cause for limited availability of trucks to bring water to the Mailuu-Suu region that's uncontaminated. Now let's consider the health consequences of the tailing sites for the villagers. This is an image of a villager's home, and as you can see, even if the villager uses outside uncontaminated water for drinking and for irrigation purposes, there's still an issue for the livestock. The livestock need to graze on grass, and grass is difficult to ship from elsewhere. The local grass is from Mailuu-Suu water, and so unfortunately the Mailuu-Suu contamination in the grass can cause for bioaccumulation in the livestock and cause harm when the villagers ingest the livestock. And when we look at the calculated contribution of irrigation to radionuclide accumulation in the villagers, adults and children, you can see that there is significant radionuclide accumulation among the villagers. And most importantly, we can see that for food crops for children, there is a high level of accumulation of hazards. But there is still an accumulation for inhalation of radon dust, external radiation, and in the milk, meat, and egg supply that the local villagers eat. And this has caused many health consequences. Out of the 697 villages families in the region, 300 have dependents with disabilities, which is a severe issue. These disabilities for children tend to be higher rates of Down syndrome, epilepsy, and developmental anomalies. And for adults, there has been higher rates of diabetes and high blood pressure. Now, we can see that radiation is still a tremendous issue in Mailuu-Suu today, and there needs to be greater sources of uncontaminated water. Right now, only 30% of villagers have access to clean water from storage wells. So the trucks bring the water from outside areas of Mailuu-Suu that are uncontaminated to the wells and fill up the wells for the local villagers to use. However, there's not enough wells to provide for all of the water needs for the villagers. And right now, the World Bank is working to relocate 2 tailing dumps in Mailuu-Suu, and the World Bank, along with the U.S., is trying to prepare to relocate 2 additional tailing dumps. And Kyrgyzstan is also seeking funding to repair the protective structures at Mailuu-Suu tailing sites so that landslides and earthquakes don't cause for the radioactive waste to go into the water source of Mailuu-Suu River and to the towns. But there needs to be greater remediation efforts. So in summary, thousands of tons of radioactive waste from the Soviet era have accumulated in the towns around Mailuu-Suu. The tailing sites storing the radioactive waste, often near the Mailuu-Suu River, are failing and aggravated by landslides and earthquakes. The villagers need the Mailuu-Suu water for everyday life. However, the radionuclides in the Mailuu-Suu River and surrounding land have caused increased rates of Down syndrome, epilepsy, developmental anomalies in children, and other health consequences in adults as well. And only 30% of villagers have access to clean water that's non-contaminated, which means there needs to be greater increase in wells at an affordable price and also remediation efforts. Thank you so much for your time, and here are my references.